Hello.
Good morning, Cole.
Good morning.
Good
Sorry I'm
morning.
late.
It's good to hear your voice.
Yes, and yours.
Thank you. And it's still morning where you are. I think you're in upstate New York.
Yes, yeah, still morning. Not as early as you, but yeah.
Well, Cole, my heart is grateful. I really appreciate you joining me. When I reached out to you, it was, um, it was more than 2 months ago. I know that, certain things were different in the world. And so I was simply just excited to visit with you
Mm.
after so long really enjoying what you've been offering through your social media and through your published work as well. I read your book This Here Flesh
Mm.
soon after it came out, I believe, and I guess read isn't the word. I just gravitated toward it, and then when it came in physical form, I sank myself into it and found not only a spiritual river that was beautiful and felt rich and soulful, but also I also experienced kinship and communion. And since then, I've been uh, just hoping for an opportunity to really, as I always say, break bread spiritually,
Mm.
with you. And so when I began this series of sacred conversations, it felt like the providential opportunity to visit with you and share with you. So again, I want to just express my gratitude. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for reading. And yeah, I'm grateful to be in conversation with you at last. I I I think I said this in an email, but I do feel so much like resonance between our work and Um, yeah, even just hearing your voice, I've heard it a few times before. I listened to your conversation with Tima Bryant, and
Mhm.
your your energy is just so restful to me, and that's really special. So I'm grateful
Mhm.
as well.
Thank you, Cole. Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting when we get to experience each other, not necessarily in person, but at least through voice, and this whole other shower of energy comes upon us, that we don't necessarily get on social media or email or text, and it
Hmm.
just reveals the richness of this being human. So I'm experiencing the same with the grace of your voice, and I would like this is a conversation, between you and I. For those who will be listening, may I read this brief bio of you that's in the back of this here flesh?
Sure.
Thank you. So this is Sacred Conversation with Cole Arthur Riley, and she is the creator of Black Liturgies, a space of Black spiritual words of liberation, lament, rage, and rest, and a project of the Center for Dignity and Contemplation, where she serves as executive curator. Born and for the most part raised in Pittsburgh, Arthur Riley studied writing at the University of Pittsburgh. She once took a professor's advice to write a little every day and has now followed that advice for nearly a decade. So I love that. I love that small story right there. You mentioned, just experiencing a resonance and kinship with my writing. It's interesting over the last couple of years, actually, I've noticed oftentimes folks on Instagram will post your work adjacent to mine in their stories often. And I
Mm.
noticed that even prior to October. And then when the violence really began in Palestine, I noticed that even more. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Yeah, I have. It's interesting that you have as well. I didn't know if I was if it was in my head. I was like, has this always been? But I've definitely seen it more. Um, yeah, people bridging our words. Yeah.
Yeah. So that takes me, that observation takes me to this place where I've been looking forward to asking you about this. Perhaps that is happening because we are drawing from a similar spiritual well in the work. The word liturgy, which is a part of your new book, Black Liturgies, and obviously a part of the work you've been doing every day. That refers to uh, the work of the people, a public worship, if you will, and I love that you have been using that word in your what I will call a ministry because to me when I read and experience the spirit within your words, I do experience a spiritual energy, a spiritual dynamic or motion like a river that does feel like worship. And bringing the worship into the public space makes it all the more powerful. With me, you know, you know how it is these days. People refer to anything you post on social media as content, and that word always,
Hmm.
when people express that to me, they say, "I love your content." That something about that word feels transactional and capitalistic,
Hmm.
and what I often share is that for me, this work has always been sacred, and the writing is prayer, and it is among the most spiritual work of my life. So again, I feel that maybe both of us are drawing from a spiritual well rather than an intellectual well. And
Hmm.
also there's this kinship of liberation. For me, since I was a child, I've just been really consumed in my heart and soul in a heartbreaking kind of way with the condition of humanity in the world and how we treat ourselves and treat each other. And so my calling has been with me all my life. And I have a feeling that yours has been as well, Cole. I noticed that you wrote in this here flesh that you didn't speak much as a child. You wrote more than you speak, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And the same for me. I grew up virtually mute. And in many ways, writing was my first voice. So I would love just to learn from you what that journey was like from childhood until this place where you are now. And you're still so young, but you have found clearly a voice through your writing.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that with me. I've only ever met one other Black person who um, kind of lived with selective mutism or mutism as a child, and
Mhm.
so I'm grateful to know there's that connection, that tether in our stories. Um, yeah, I've always been, quiet, and I think some of that quiet is was born of anxiety and fear. Um, and some was born of a kind of connection to my own interior world. But as a child, my silence felt incredibly alienating to me. I come from a very loud and talkative and charming and charismatic, lovely family. And the only one who was kind of existing in the world in the way that I was in my own small world, in the way that I was. And so for me, I would find myself unable to speak in the presence of anyone that wasn't my immediate household, which created a lot of complications because, with selective mutism, it's, on some level you can speak, but the feeling is that they cannot make the words, um, which is a kind of captivity in its own right and led to all kinds of shame and alienation. And it was only in, I mean, kind of, I don't want to use the word grew out, but I think that took on new forms. I remained shy, but you know, went to speech therapy. I had a number of speech impediments and um, eventually kind of came into a new way of being. And it was in adulthood that I really started to look back at like little child Cole and realize that her silence wasn't just tragedy and shame, that, there's actually something really beautiful in a child being able to kind of commit themselves to their interior world in that way. And so now I'm 33 now, and the past few years, I think I've been recovering some of that silence that felt like a home for me, felt like a refuge for me. And I
Mm,
wonder if it's like that for you. So now I sometimes find myself speaking in, very crowded rooms and kind of having these out of body experiences where I kind of can't believe it. The people who know me, can't believe it. But I've learned a kind of silence that's, that has agency in it, that's not captivity, it's choice, and there can be a wisdom to it. And I hear so much, there's so much to be heard in silence. And yeah, I wonder if it's the same for you. And I wonder if that's why our voices kind of sound similar. Like they maybe to other people, maybe they sound like they're coming from the same room because on some level they are. And I think people who deal in quiet um show up in the world in particular ways that can be kind of strange and
mm.
subversive, I think. Yeah.
Wow, thank you, Cole. That I love that. Yeah, I'm feeling this right now inside of myself. This experience of it's like a sky of stars. Sorry, a night sky of stars, where the these connections are being made between the stars. Like the phrase "collecting" or "connecting the dots." It's feeling
Mm,
like that as I listen to you really describe why our written voice in this day and time may sound and feel in a similar way. And it makes a lot of sense to me. Almost daily, people will write to me and they'll share with me that the work that I offer is like a balm or a salve to them. Those two words, balm and
mm,
salve, they affect me greatly because for me, those are biblical words. Those are sacred words that refer to the spiritual dimension of a person. And so they do, when they use those words, it brings me back to just reflecting on, one, the sacredness of the work, and two, you know, I reflect on, okay, well, what is at the root of this voice that is coming through me? How has it been fostered and nourished? What elements were brought into it and are continuing to be infused into it, so such that it becomes balm and salve? What is that story? Because I want to be in touch with that. Listening to you takes me back to my childhood where, yeah, I too come from a very loud family, a
mm,
large, loud family. And I remember that, like you, the silence didn't feel like a joy or a blessing to me at the time. It felt like refuge.
mm,
It felt like sanctuary. And I grew up in the mountains of New Mexico. I grew up with a wonderful access to the woods, to the forests, to nature and the wilderness. And I spent as much time as possible in the trees, and by the waters and in the silence of breeze. And as I'm sharing this, I'm realizing, I was collecting stories all that time, and they were stories they were coming from the human world, but they were really also, and maybe even more so, coming from the natural world. And I just felt safer in
Mm,
nature and in the wilderness than I did around humans. I often, whether it was at school or home, or really anywhere I would be as a child, I would seek out solitude in the physical sense. In my interior, I always kind of felt in solitude, and that often felt good to me. But I would seek out this physical solitude, meaning I would crawl under the bunk bed that me and my
mm,
brother shared in our bedroom, or I'd spend a lot of time in closets, maybe reading or with a flashlight or something, or just
yes.
sitting there. Yeah, under even in my own bed, Cole, I would seek solitude even more by pulling the covers up over my head, and I
Yes.
would be I would be in my mind, in my spirit, I was inside of a cave or cavern, or I was a turtle with a shell over me. I was protecting myself, and but I was also creating space. I was creating sanctuary. And
Mm,
I would do that at school. I would do that, wherever I was. And you mentioned people being shocked to hear you now speaking in a room of people. So I began to emerge into my speaking voice in my 20s.
mm,
And at that time, I remember this acute feeling of, um, I don't know if it was not really discomfort, but it was almost like a shock. I was so unfamiliar with my own voice that it felt out of body. It felt as though someone else was speaking. When I would hear my voice, move through my body and out into the space, it was like a disconnect, a dissociation. I felt, oh, someone else must be speaking, but my mouth is moving.
right.
I don't know if you can relate to that.
Yeah, I absolutely can. I mean, even when I recorded the audiobook for This Here Flesh, I narrated it and it was one of the I think one of the most transformative experiences I've ever lived through, quite unexpectedly, because you have to hear the sound of your own voice. You hear it in the headset for hours and hours and hours. It's inescapable. And
Yeah.
I experienced a kind of like confrontation with the sound of my own voice in a way that I hadn't yet really confronted it. And so it was difficult and painful at first. I mean, many of us kind of learn to despise our own voices, unfortunately. But by the end of it, I felt so much beauty and power and like reading my grandma's words in my voice. I had to take my own voice seriously because I owed my grandma's words that. And so I had this kind of, I think, a spiritual experience when um narrating the audiobook in that way, a spiritual kind of reclamation of my voice and kind of taking it seriously in the world. And yeah, I resonate with that.
Oh, wow. I love this. I feel like we could talk for hours here, just sharing these parallels and these synchronicities. So the only book of mine that I have recorded as an audiobook is Daughter Drink This Water. And as I was listening to you, I felt as though I was just listening to myself because I had that exact same experience. And I recorded it several times because there were all kind of technical challenges coming up, and I recorded it in studio. I recorded it at home. It was a marathon and an endurance and experience. But you used this word confronting, and that was beautiful because that's what it was. I was confronting my voice, even though I've been speaking publicly and professionally for many years, around the country and around the world. And somehow that's been different, I think, because, I'm not hearing my voice through a headset. I'm always hearing it sort of as I always hear it, even with the microphone. But recording the book was startling.
Mm.
And it was like a snake trying to crawl into its skin rather than shed its skin.
Wow.
That's how it felt. Like, oh my God, that this is my voice and I can't avoid it. And I have to find a way to come into it, inhabit it, not flee from it as I am articulating these words. This is my instrument, and I need, like a jazz musician, the performance is live. It's already begun, and I, I need to I need to get into my voice. I need to be at peace, make peace with it. I remember just, having those kind of thoughts and feelings, and it was painful in ways. And like you say, though, ultimately it was deeply healing and
Hmm.
yeah, and evolving for me. It brought me to a new place with myself and with, for me, there's just I feel that we each are given the particular quality of speaking voice that we have for divine purpose, and I feel this. And so for me, that experience with the audiobook just helped me on this journey in which I have been increasingly just becoming conscious of how purposeful my own speaking voice is in terms of just, Creator has composed me, like you compose a symphony. I've been composed to have these different elements, and I should not be stunning or neglecting or avoiding this element that is called voice. Instead, I need to recognize its centrality to the symphony, to the music, to the experience that others are having, not so much with me, but with the word. And so
Yeah.
that's a journey I'm still on, and I love it. It feels good. It feels like I'm just moving through all these seasons of love within myself, within my ancestry, as you mentioned, that, okay, I, as I embrace and open up into this instrument, it's also letting my ancestors through. It's letting my people through. It's letting the word through, and it's letting the word reach into souls in the particular way that
Yes.
is intended. Yeah,
Yeah. Can I
yeah,
ask you something?
sure.
So, um, I too share the experience of reading in the closet as a child. I actually just wrote about this a few weeks ago. And I mean, it's just not lost on me that we both then became people who are now sharing our voices with, sometimes thousands of people in a way. And I'm wondering
Mhm.
where that shift occurred for you, um, and that balance between kind of the sanctuaries that we were creating as children and then becoming a
Mhm.
person who now kind of donates your voice to the people. So we both were kind of children of the closet and creating these sanctuaries for ourselves as children. And I'm wondering where the shift for you occurred or the balance even of becoming someone who now donates your voice, to other people, um, and for other people and for the cause of other people. Maybe this is where liberation kind of comes into the story. When did that occur for you? That beginning?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you asked me this. Thank you. Um, because it's been a big part of my life, this transition. And well, I can say that maybe as a child, I always knew that I would be. mm, I had spiritual visions, as a child of not only the condition of the world and humanity, but of my role in it and in what I was here for. And as a child, it was painfully uncomfortable for me to accept what those visions were showing me because I wanted to remain in my shell.
Mm.
And so I I spent a lot of time trying to think as a child, what can I be when I grow up so that I don't have to be exposed to human beings and I don't have to be noticed. And, you know, obviously the idea of needing to use my speaking voice around people was painful for me. And so I resisted. But those visions were always with me. They were always clear and strong. And I knew that my servitude had to do with addressing pain and suffering in the world, specifically the pain and suffering of oppression. And, that's a lifelong journey. It's nothing new for me, even in graduate school. That's what my doctoral degree is in social psychology of race and intergroup relations, and particularly looking at the dynamics of oppression and the dynamics of freedom. And so I've been, pondering these things literally since I was a small child, as far back as my memory extends. And so maybe it was like a wrestling match where I wanted to stay inside my shell. I wanted to stay silent. I didn't want people to notice me. As I started moving through different seasons of my adolescence into coming of age in adulthood, the tides of servitude began to be stronger than my impulse to be silent.
Mm.
I found myself, for example, particularly when I got to university, undergraduate studies. And I remember at that time, I just was naturally being drawn to being a part of student organizing efforts. We were organizing against apartheid in South Africa at the time, and we were organizing against the experience of African Americans and just brown and black people in general here in the United States and everywhere. And so here I was a teenager still, but I found myself in these spaces, and these spaces sort of, they demand that you speak, right? That you say something, that you offer something, that you contribute something. And so even as I was just beginning, I was in the nascency of finding my writing voice and sharing that while I was on campus. At the same time, I was being just, it was like a great hand that was just pulling me out of silence into voice, speaking voice. And so, to respond to what you're asking, it was that spiritual sense of calling, of servitude that forced my hand, that really just felt so much more important to me than my personal comfort with being quiet. And I also, it was there in those lands of early adulthood that I just first started to notice how people were responding to my voices, both the writing voice and the speaking voice. And that was uncomfortable for me, but also it was undeniable. Like I didn't, it really shifted my identity. It made me reassemble, first disassemble and then reassemble my identity because I, I didn't want to believe what I was noticing, which was that people seemed to care what I was expressing. It seemed to affect them. And when you start to notice that, I think it can often cause you to hesitate or step back because there is a feeling of duty that's sewn into a calling when you begin to realize, well, maybe I have something to offer. Then for me, what came with that recognition was, oh man, maybe I have something to offer. Like that, oh, okay, I have a duty. I have a duty in terms of my interior condition and caring for myself. I have a duty in terms of my emotional, psychological, spiritual, physical, mental, and social well-being. I have a duty that I not be effusing malice or malignancy into the world, but that I be effusing medicine into the world. And so those were the days when I began to really consciously be aware of this transition, the shift from that, valley of silence out into that broad meadow of expression. And it was years. It took me years to grow comfortable with that journey.
Mm.
Yeah. I really appreciate you asking me that. It's something that I haven't reflected on with this kind of depth in a while. Although every single day, and I'm curious about this for you, every single day, I do relive some version of that. This, it's like this current inside me of my soul waters stirring, and the biggest, deepest, broadest part of me wants to just serve and be medicine and offer something. It happened in a very intense way back in 2020 after George Floyd was murdered, and it's happened at different points. I mean, for us, it's happening every day because there's harm that's happening to us and our people every day. This feeling of just wanting to help and contribute. The last couple of months have been consumed in that. And then there's this other part of me that, like many people, there are times when I would prefer to just simply be able to exist in the very real and profound peace that's in my soul, and the peace that I find in the natural world around me, and just be in that. But I mean, this has been my whole life. I go from harvesting that peace in that solitude and spaciousness to bringing to the human market these words. It's like these are the produce of my lifetime, and I'm, I feel so blessed and gifted to have this be my, my vocation. This somehow alchemizing spirit and sorrow and suffering and beauty and joy and love and mercy and grace, composting that into words that can be of a nature and quality that people feel safe to digest and they open to. And that's to craft words in that way. It may be a combination of innate nature and then skill development. With you, I feel your language is so beautiful and rich to me. Maybe I'm biased. I know I'm biased because it feels, again, very similar to me. It just feels like this soft, soothing stream that's meandering through the forest but it's very clear and vivid and bright and honest. It's very direct and unassuming. It's not performative. It's not performing. It's it's nourishing. It's just filled with sediment and nutrient, and so that's how I experience your language. Your language is very rich and beautiful. I imagine you must have read a great deal as a child, yeah?
Yes, I did. Always reading. And thank you for saying that. Yeah, I resonate with that
Hmm.
kind of movement toward service as well, with language and words, and this kind of shift. And uh, maybe started for me in 2016, more of that shift. I began sharing some of my writing publicly, and realizing that uh, there were a lot of people around me who were exhausted of using their voice. And I thought, okay, well, I maybe have a little more bandwidth here, given I've spent so much time in silence and rest. And so I began to share writing, and something similar happened around the time I began Black Liturgies. But I love that we're both on this journey of kind of um, acknowledging the complexities of silence and voice. Like, there are no binaries here, you hear, silence is violence. And the brilliance of Audre Lorde, who says, um, your silence will not protect you. Which, yes, I believe those things. And I believe that silence can be a harbor and a healing and a rest. And um, that we can kind of learn to occupy and resist all of these different kinds of silences, and all of the different forms our voices takes, I think is a very kind of healing way to look at voice in the world. And it makes it easier as well. It makes it easier to share, a little bit of yourself every day in writing online, when you know that there's some kind of rest waiting for you as well, some type of renewal waiting for you as well. So I definitely have to push myself more toward the practice of sharing and service. Um, but it's worth it, I think.
There are particular, very obvious genocides happening at this time. And I was saying that many people don't realize that genocide is an almost continuous presence in our human world and always has been. It's a particularly salient and central right now in social media and media and society. And the last couple of months, so many souls have been really paying attention and digesting what's coming through. We're experiencing such intense grief and mourning and loss, violence and rage and sorrow and prayer and some incredible rallying that millions and millions of souls are doing, struggling to end violence, and for me to treat the roots of violence, supremacy and caste systems and apartheid and indentured servitude and slavery. These things are a part of our journey. I would love to have you share, what it's like for you. What is the labor required for you to continuously, daily offer the words, the work, the medicine that you do?
Yes. I mean, I think in seasons like this, you mentioned the multiple genocides unfolding right now. I think for me to speak to our moment with any kind of integrity, I have to become honest with myself about whatever it is in me that would sacrifice human life, on the altars of capitalism, utility. I have to become honest with me about whatever it is in me that would kind of ignore and neglect the cries of children, and anything that I'm seeing, any injustice and uh, violence I'm seeing in the world around me, I believe on some level I'm not exempt from, that I have the capacity for great harm. And I think it's been a practice and a journey to and of kind of becoming honest about that helps me to speak more clearly in resistance to it. There's a real place, I think, for self-examination in the midst of such tragedy. Not too much self-examination,
Hmm.
we don't want to make our kind of selfhoods uninhabitable
Hmm.
altogether. But I think there is a place for it to figure out, what's going on in me. I need the whatever revolution I'm a part of, it's on some level going to start in my interior and in my motives and me becoming honest about the things that I'm afraid of, the things I'm afraid of losing, the things that compel me toward violence in some way. And I think that makes, at least I like to think that makes me a better writer in the end, a more honest writer in the end. So to say a lot of interior examination, um, and a lot of good friends who are kind of not surrendering me, not allowing me to kind of surrender to fear and intimidation, and to encourage me that they'll remain, if I say the wrong thing, if I do the wrong thing, that they'll still be here. And it gives you a lot of permission to experiment with the kind of boldness, I think.
Hmm. Wow, thank you, Cole. I really appreciate you sharing about your human vulnerability and all of this. I imagine that many people, um, they digest a writer's work, especially on social media, and they have an experience with the words, but they don't often reflect or try to empathically, intuitively sense what must it have taken for the writer to yield those words, because there is risk, um, there is harm, there is social sanctioning, censorship, there is judgment, there is banishment. People lose friendship and family. They lose many things when they dare to write. James Baldwin, one of the things that I admire so much about his soul, and so many other kindred artists, souls like him, was just that, he was willing to take those risks. He was willing, because he loved so much, he was willing to make, you know, love his God
Mm,
and not his fears. He people don't often reflect on what it cost him to be so truthful and honest and to speak directly to the malice and the menace and the poison and the disease and the pathology. He spoke directly to it. And so what I hear you saying is that, you too, like everyone else, you have your human vulnerabilities, but you've also received really beautiful and faithful support from those around you that has fortified you in this labor. And, I think that's important for people to know. Many people don't have that kind of support around them.
mm,
They feel very alone and isolated when it comes to speaking up and taking action. This is true for every point in our human history, right? Where atrocity has happened, there have been people who've overcome their fears and they've done what they can. There are people who succumb to their fears, and in the end, harm rolls on like a tank.
mm,
And but I love what you said about the introspection, the opportunity to examine yourself. That's what these moments are for me.
mm,
I I too, like I have to interrogate and appraise my own soul every moment of every day. That's my most consistent exercise or practice beyond anything I do for my body or um, any other aspect of my life is this spiritual examination and a
Mm,
reckoning. Because if I don't do that, then I find that I can be lost in ego, which
mm,
is nothing more for me than just a collection of other people's voices. And I don't want to write from other people's voices, their fears and projections and traumas and their anger and hatred. I I'm really determined to write from what my own soul is saying, what my creator is saying through my soul. But in order
mm,
to do that, I have to really, really sit with myself and be honest about my own impulses. I try
yes.
to really understand, right? I try to understand spiritually the root of where violence is coming from and where hate is coming from and what are these souls. If I dehumanize those souls, then I immediately begin to dehumanize myself and my writing will become an instrument for, either entertainment or, more harm. It just becomes the next
Hmm.
generation of harm.
Hmm.
So, thank you for sharing that. I experience what you offer and I can feel the spiritual humility in it. And I can feel the work that you do with yourself.
Hmm.
And I really appreciate the way that in your writing, you speak to the spiritual, emotional, psychological, social root of harm and violence. Whereas, social media is understandably flooded with topical focus on social categories,
Hmm.
these people, this country, this nation, what this group is doing to that group, what that group's doing to this group. That's a big part of how humans, how we tell our stories. What I feel is unique about your offerings is that you touch all of that, but you touch it at the root. So you're not necessarily in the work of listing social categories. You're just touching these points of harm and points of healing in a very beautiful way.
Mm, thank you. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
when you do pay attention to the spiritual component of, of what it means to be human, things begin to connect, the constellations, so to speak, is that you were talking about at the beginning of our conversation. Things begin to connect, and you realize that um, your experience as a human, your experience with suffering isn't all that unique, and that these kind of conflicts, these tensions, they're all connected and matters. I believe, at least in my belief system, they're matters of the human spirit, that human condition that kind of transcends and even a collective condition. Um, so I do feel like I kind of have a responsibility to speak to that or speak to it in that way. So anyway, it makes me proud that you've
Mm.
noticed.
Well, you know, one of the things that we studied in graduate school was the psychology of persuasion, right? And that has been used throughout times for nefarious reasons and also for beautiful ones. And one of the things that I observe and have observed throughout my lifetime when just reflecting on human communication, I've noticed that when we dive too deeply into these boxes, these social categories, as we're trying to communicate some essential truth, it makes it easy for other people to box us into that category because we've already prompted that. We've jumped into it.
Hmm.
And it's like we've activated this us versus them polarity, this, we and they, with this this pathological tribalism, let's call it, where you just have these opposites, and they're posed in an adversarial way when you jump in this box. It may not have been your intention, but it makes it easy for other people to dismiss your expression and your argument, and to dismiss you entirely, because then they can say, oh, you know, you're what you've just stated is invalid because, and then they go blah blah blah, because they have their prepared list for, they're used
Hmm.
to processing things in terms of these categorical adversarial relationships. And so what I see you doing in your work is that you reach beneath the surface of that dichotomizing, and you reach beneath the surface of that to find the common root. And you're touching that root and holding it, and you're expressing yourself from that place, which makes it harder for people to dismiss your expression, because now they are sort of thrown off by the absence of your dichotomizing. You're
Hmm.
speaking to things of the soul, you're speaking to human yearnings and human prayers and human hopes and fears and dreams. And so it's not as though you're, affiliating yourself with a team, if you know what I mean,
Hmm.
in the way that you are languaging your meaning. And I find that to be very useful in a world like ours, where so much of the human communication and discourse is very dichotomizing and polarizing, and it makes it difficult for us when we are like that to sort of disengage from our lizard brain and the cortisol and the adrenaline of that, again, the pathological tribalism, where we're so attached to this particular group identity, whatever it is, that we are hostile, ferociously hostile and hateful toward anyone who expresses anything that feels to us as though it's against our group. And
Hmm.
you don't provide people that opportunity, because you're not actually addressing groups. You're addressing the human soul. And I really appreciate that about your work. And I know that it, as you said, it takes a lot of honest interior reckoning for you to be able to do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I mm, I appreciate you, Cole. You feel like a rare kindred spirit in this world for me. So I just want you to know that I'm always sending you love and lifting you up in spirit, and I'm so proud of you and
Mm.
admiring, for just where you are on the inside at a young age, in a world like this. I'm excited for, your next book birthing. I'm excited for your journey ahead as a person. And yeah, I'm here. I'm here
Mm.
for you. I want you to know that I have a passion for just putting my arms around others, and just supporting them through their life journeys. And whether you want to call that mentoring or um, fathering, uncling, just I'm here for that. And
Mm.
yeah, I just
I
wanted you to.
appreciate that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I don't know if I've heard this somewhere, but I had the thought as during this conversation, that our souls speak the same language. And I do think that is a kind of rare and special thing. So I'm grateful that we've gotten to connect. And yeah, even through the silences woven into the recording, I thought, well, if anyone can deal with the silences and the delays, I think it's us. And so I'm just as grateful for the conversation. Yeah.
uh, Thank you, Cole. Yeah, we're we're comfortable with silence, very comfortable, and and there's a communication that happens in that as well. And I'm praying that the listeners will feel what they need to feel, even in the silences. That they will receive other voices and meaning along the way. So I've really enjoyed visiting with you, and again, I'll always be sending you love. Please,
Mm,
please, just take wonderful care of yourself, and I'm looking forward to your future.
thank you.
Thank you, Cole. Have a beautiful day today, and a beautiful season, a peaceful, as much as possible, peaceful end to this year for yourself.
You too. Sending peace and rest.
Thank you. I received that. Thank you, Cole. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye.